What's up guys, this is Casey with another Blender tutorial. Today we're going to be making a material library. This is a very powerful tool in Blender that's going to help you more easily and quickly be able to add materials to your scenes in Blender. So I want to show you guys how to actually make one of these. So to start, let's pretend that this is our material library. We are basically just going to start out with this cube. Now I like to add a couple more shapes to it just so we can get an idea of what we're looking at when we're actually previewing our materials. So if I hit Shift A and add a new mesh, and let's add a sphere. And then I'm just going to hit G to grab it, X for the x-axis, and move it over here just a little bit. And then I want to smooth shade that sphere. The next thing I want to add is something a little bit more complex. So I'm going to hit Shift A, add a mesh, and we're going to add Suzanne the Monkey. If you don't know, in the old days of Blender, it used to say Suzanne instead of monkey, so that's where Suzanne comes from. If you've ever heard Suzanne or heard her name before and wondered, I don't understand why she's named Suzanne. Why does everybody name her Suzanne? Well, that's why. It used to be her name when it was the old days of Blender. So now I basically just want to line my camera up so that I can see all three objects. Now you can smooth shade the monkey, Suzanne, if you would like. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Something like that. And the last thing we need to do is actually add a plane. So Shift A, Mesh, Plane. And I just want to drag this down to the bottom of all my objects here and scale it up about 8 times. So now we have our floor. And for our floor, we're just going to make a very basic material. Click New, and we're done. So now we have the very basis of our material library. Now that we have our basis, there's a couple odd and end things that we actually need to do. The first thing is we need to really unwrap each of these objects, but we also need to connect each of these objects so that they're sharing materials. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select all 3 of these objects. So I'm right-clicking my cube, holding Shift and right-clicking my sphere, and holding Shift and right-clicking the monkey. Once I have all 3 of these objects selected, I want to hit Control J. That's going to join all 3 of these objects together. So now when I create a material for these objects, they're all going to share that material, which is going to be useful later, and I'll show you as soon as we get to that part. So now that I have all 3 of these materials, the next thing I want to do is I really want to unwrap. So we should probably unwrap each of these things separately from each other, just because it makes for a lot cleaner of an unwrap. So I'm going to box select this, my cube, and I'm going to hit U, unwrap. Next I want to select Suzanne, the monkey, and for her, let's unwrap by doing a Smart UV project. Lastly, we have our sphere. So let's select our sphere, and we want to U sphere projection. It's important to know that you can change the unwrapping of these at any time. You're not stuck with those unwraps, but you have to be able to have these unwrapped before you can really begin to add a lot of useful materials. So we're pretty much ready. We're ready to actually start adding materials. One last thing that you might want to do is actually add a Vertex Paint to your materials. So since they're all joined together, if we just click down here on our object mode and switch it to Vertex Paint, now you could go in and do this by hand. However, because this is a lot of general materials that we're going to be using, I'm just going to go down here to Paint, Dirty Vertex Colors. Now obviously it's not going to do a whole lot to the cube, it does a lot to the sphere, and it gives us good results on Suzanne. That's pretty much what we're looking for. Not every material is going to look fantastic on a cube, not every material will look good on the sphere, and not every material will look good on the monkey. That's why we have all 3 of these set up. So hopefully every material that we add will have at least one of these objects that it looks good on, so we can get a good render for it. Now that we have our Vertex Paint, we can go back to our object mode. And now it's time to actually add materials. So we have our very basic material set on the cube already, so let's click on Use Nodes. Now if I go to my node editor, I can actually begin to create my material. So let's make something very, very basic. I'm just going to mix this diffuse. So I'm adding a shader, mix shader, and then adding a shader, glossy shader, plugging it into the bottom of the shaders here. I'm going to keep the roughness at about a 0.2, and we will make the factor about a 0.2. Now if we hit our preview tab over here in the material section, you can see what it actually looks like. Let's change the color just a little bit. Let's make it blue. So now we have this kind of shiny blue ball. It's not anything impressive, but it's just to give you a general idea of what we're trying to do for this. So now we can go back to our 3D view, go to our camera. I'm going to change this lamp up here to a sun lamp. Change it to 3. You might want to use an HDR image for your actual lighting of this, just to give you a better idea of what the lighting is going to look like. But for now, I'm just going to use a sun lamp. And in my actual materials library, I opted not to do an HDR image because it usually takes a longer time to render. So I just use a sun lamp. It's okay to use just a sun lamp as long as you understand what your materials are going to end up looking like. So now I'm just going to click on Rendered View. And there we have it. We have our material, and you can see that it looks pretty good against all 3 of these objects. This is just a very basic, diffuse, glossy shader. So now I can go back to my solid view. Now that I know it looks good, and I like the material, the next thing I want to do is save the material. This is the most important step of this entire process, is saving this material. Because if you don't, and you close this file, you will lose all of your hard work. In order to save this material, over here in our Materials tab, right here where it gives you the options for material and you can name your material, all of that good stuff, there's this little F key. And that means to save the data block even if it has no users. So as soon as I get rid of this material and replace it with another material, it will no longer have any users. And once I close Blender, there's a very good possibility that that material will no longer exist in my file. In order to counteract that, we need to hit this F key and save it. Once you hit the F key, you will see that it is darkened. Also, when you click this little drop-down box, you'll see that it has an F. That means that it has been saved. So, now that I have that material, I can immediately erase the material and add a new material. You want to make sure that you are naming each of your materials something that you're going to remember, because you want to be able to use these materials later in other projects. That's the entire idea of a materials library. So let's name this one something like, let's just name it plastic. It's not going to actually be a plastic material, but I just wanted to name it something interesting. So now let's go back to our node editor. And for this one, let's make another very basic shader. So I'm going to add a shader velvet, a shader mix shader, and a shader glossy. And I'm just going to mix these two together, connect it to the output, and you can kind of see what it looks like. For the roughness, I will set to 0.4. And let's see, let's add a Fresnel node as well. Fresnel, plug that in. Okay, it just gives us this kind of interesting material over here. We're not going for anything complex or fancy. This tutorial isn't about actually making the materials. It's just about how to set up a materials library. So now if I go back to my 3D view, I can double check the render to make sure it looks exactly how I want it to look like. And we'll just pretend that, yes, this is exactly how I wanted this to look like. So I'm going back to my solid view. Now if I click on my drop down box, you can see that my old material is still there. Material, and it has the little F right next to it. You can see that it is a blue sphere with a little bit of gloss to it. We also now have our plastic material. Now if I were to delete my plastic material to where there is no material set on these objects anymore, and I click this drop down box, you can see that it says plastic and it has a little 0 next to it. That 0 means that it has 0 users. There is no objects assigned to this material. If I were to save this Blender file and reopen it at a later date, this plastic material may not be there. And I say may not because Blender doesn't always delete these files. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So we have to make sure that we're saving every one of these materials that we want to keep for later. So let's hit that little F key again. Now if I go back to my drop down, you can see that it has the F there. So now once I save my Blender file and reopen my Blender file, it's going to have both of these materials. Well, it'll have all 3 of these materials because this one is already assigned to an object. So the idea behind this is that you're saving just materials that you can append to projects later. Now normally you'd want to go and file save as, and you would save it as material library so that you immediately know where to look when you're looking for materials to append to. I already have a file named materials library, so I don't want to save this file over the top of that one. Just know that before you quit, you have to go and save it as a materials library. Now you can name it something else if you'd like, if you can remember it better. It doesn't have to be named materials library. That's just what I like to name it. So let me open my materials library for you. And back to my 3D view. Aha! So this is what my general material library looks like. I have my sun lamp, my plane, my 3 objects just as I showed you before, and over here in the drop down box I have all of my materials that I like to use. And all of them have the F next to it. That means that I've saved them all. So let's pretend that there is a material in a different file, a different blend file that I've created that I want to append to my materials library. Let me show you how to do that. If you click on File and you click on Append, you should be able to go to your Blender files, the ones that you already have saved, and let's see if we can find one that has a material. Let me go to my robot blend. Once I click on a Blender file, you'll see that it comes up with all the objects, mesh, lamp, images, pencils, curves, cameras, all of the things that are involved in that blend file. The only thing that I'm interested in is the materials. So I'm going to click that material folder, and it immediately comes up to show me all of my materials. So let's say I really like the sand material that I made, and I want to be able to use it later. So I'm going to append sand. Now if I click my little drop down box over here, you'll see that it says sand and has a 0. So now if I click on that, now I already have one named sand in here. It's called Sand Pro. But if I click on the new sand file, it'll give me a preview of what it's going to look like. I can go to my rendered view and see what it actually looks like. And then I can click on the F key again and save it to my materials library so I can append from it later. And it's just that easy to append brand new materials to a file. So the next time you're working on a project and you make a material and you look at it and you go, man, that's a really cool material. I like that material a lot. I want to use this later. I want to use this in more projects. This is how you would do that. You put it in your materials library. Now, if we are working on a project and we want to append from this file, let me show you how to do that as well. Let's go to my robot blend. So this is the file. Let's say that I'm working on this project and I want to use that Sand Pro material that I have in my materials library. Now I already have a sand file sitting in my materials over here. However, all I have to do to use for my materials library is go to File, Append, and go to my blend files, find my materials library, go to Material, and here are all of my materials that I can use. So I wanted Sand Pro. That means Sand Procedural, if you were asking. And now right here in my drop-down box you will see Sand Pro. I can click it, and just like that, it has now been appended to my file and I'm using it on my plane. So the next time I have a sandy project, or a project that uses tree bark or wooden floors or a glass material, instead of remaking the entire material or trying to make a new material, I can just append from that file and reuse it in any way that I would like. Now I would like to reopen my material library, and it keeps going back to my node editor. Okay, so let me show you. Let's go with my multi-metal. So this is a material that I've created that allows me to create a lot of different types of metal using one basic material. So the idea behind a material library is not to just store a lot of materials that you've made. It's to store materials that you can use again and make it easy as possible to append to your projects. So if I go to my node editor, you can see that this is just two nodes in my node editor. I have metal and my material output. What I've done to this actual material here is I've created a node group. If I hit tab, you can see that I actually have a lot more nodes involved in this material than what you can see. But in creating this one basic node, I give myself easy access to any of the factors that I need to change in another project. So I can change the IOR value, I can change the coded value, I can change the roughness, the anisotropic amount, the actual anisotropy, the rotation of the anisotropy, the bump distance, and the bump strength. And then I can also plug in vectors down here at the bottom and normal maps. So I've made it as easy as possible for myself to append this into a project and change this material in any way that I need to fit the project that I'm working on. I've done this with as many of these as I possibly can. So let me see. Let me go to, I think bathroom tiles has one, yeah. So this is my bathroom tile node. You can see that if I hit the tab key, again, I have a very nice size or amount of nodes making up this material. However, I just have one very small node making up the basis of the material, so I can change it very easily. If I append it to a project and decide that I want my tiles to be blue and white, I can easily change the colors from here. If I would like to change how it is being rendered, I can change that too. I can change the size of those tiles and the strength of the bump in the tiles. So I've made it as easy as possible to append these to any project that you can. I would highly suggest that you figure out how to do this, how to make actual node groups like this, because it can be very handy when you're making projects in the future. If you come back to your materials library and you look at something like, let's see, what else do I have? Let's go to my Dirt Pro, my Procedural Dirt. So you're looking at this and you say, I don't know what this is. I haven't worked on this in a few months. I don't remember what I did. So in this one, I don't have one basic group. Instead, I've used these frames. So I have my dirt color frame to show where the actual color and shaders are coming from. I have the bump node, or the bump frame, to actually show where the bump mapping is coming from. And then obviously I have so I can map it to my objects with this node here. So it becomes kind of a reminder to myself of how I'm going to use each of these and how I can tweak it. So if I get it into a project and say, well, that looks too bumpy, I can come down here and I can adjust like the bump node, or it's just too small for my project. I need it to be bigger. I can come right here and adjust the mapping size. So that's pretty much it. That's the material library. That's how you make it. That's how you append to it, and from it, it can be one of the most useful tools that you have at your disposal when making a Blender project. It can save you a lot of time, a lot of hassle, and it just makes things a heck of a lot easier. So with that being said, I'm actually offering my material library to you guys if you're interested. I have 30 different materials that I've spent the last 3 months working on. I have, let's see, let's go through a couple of these. I've got worn bronze, I have procedural wood. So if I click on that, you can see I've got some procedural wood textures down here. Let's see, I've got some styrofoam. Looks like styrofoam. I have, what else do I have? I have some leather. Kind of hard to see because I made it black, but it's definitely leather. I have flake paint, which is glossy but has like metallic shards all over it. Looks like metallic paint. Obviously I have stuff like metals, aluminum. I have that multi-metal. I even have just basic stuff in here. This is glass that I made that is a lot better than just putting a glass shader. And I have gold. I have ice, if you wanted to do ice, if you had like a snow scene that you were working on. There it is. I have plastics. I have rocks from photos and rock procedurals. I should say that almost all of these are procedural materials, so you won't have to use textures. You won't have to worry about mapping too much. However, when you append them to projects, you may have to unwrap your object. And the couple of them that use photos, like my floor, the floor one actually uses a couple of photos. So I've included those photos in the package. And I've also included photos of these 3 objects rendered in all 30 of these materials, so that you have an easy reference of what each one of them is going to look like. So if you guys are interested, if you want to jump start on your material library and you want to just jump right into a project and start appending some of these or tweaking them, it's available at my website. That's www.caseyunderhill.com. I will have a link in my description of the video so that you can click on it, go there. I'm just asking $10 because it can be an incredibly useful tool in Blender to have all of these materials. And of course they are completely licensed, copyright free. So once you purchase this, you can do whatever you want with it. You don't have to give me credit. You don't have to put anything in your copyright at the end of your files. You can just append it to a project and use it any way you'd like. If you want to give it to your friend, well, I would ask that they buy it, but whatever. If you want to do that, you can do that. You can tweak them, you can make them your own if you don't like something. Whatever it is that you want to do with this material library, you can do with it. It's there for you so that you can learn, so that you can have materials, and so you can append them to your projects and start using them today. So if you're interested, like I said, go to my website, www.caseyunderhill.com, and check it out. Thank you guys for watching.